handful of people out there still have day jobs. So if it's Friday and you're finishing your day job and you're looking forward to the weekend, then congratulations. If you're like the rest of us musicians and you're hanging out wishing you had a gig right now, then thanks for hanging out with us here too. We're going to talk a little bit about some of that with my next guest. Before we get started, thanks for being here at All Access Live with Kevin Rankin. My sponsors, 5 Star Guitars, right here, have been incredibly supportive. They're based in Beaverton, Oregon. They've got great guitars. They've got repairs. They've got lessons. With pros like Jennifer Batten, you can get lessons online. You can do Skype lessons or Zoom lessons. So if you go to www.5starguitars.com, you'll get all those services and more. Since they're in Oregon, there's no sales tax, so you can save a bunch of money, buy great guitars, and support local and support my show. So when you do that, make sure you let them know that Kevin Rankin and All Access Live sent you that way. I also want to thank Audix microphones right here and Audix headphones. Audix is based here in Wilsonville, Oregon. So I've got all sorts of local representation happening, and I'm grateful for that. Audix and I are going to be doing some cool partnerships as we go forward. So I'll announce some of that next week. But before we get any more of that discussion, I got to tell you about somebody that is both inspiring and intriguing. A beautiful woman who is doing good things for the world. And we're going to share positivity, start your weekend off in the right way. So with no further ado, I want to introduce you to Jenn Stone. Jenn, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful intro.
I feel a little radio today, but man, it is so nice to see your face. I miss you.
Yeah.
It's been a long time since we got to see each other in person.
I think 2016.
That's nuts. Yeah.
I think, yeah.
On a boat in the Caribbean.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I don't know how much you've followed any of the cruise information about the last few years, but or the last few months. The beginning of this pandemic got a little crazy,
I bet.
Did you you haven't been on since?
No,
Okay.
no. In fact, what's crazy, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later, but I think that gig when I met you was probably the last like out of town gig that I did.
Really?
Mhm.
Okay. Well, I will tell you really quick. Just at the beginning of the pandemic, they called us, Flock of Seagulls. They called us to come back on that cruise. We're booked for it next year, but a bunch of the bands were canceling because of the COVID thing.
Yeah.
They were desperate. They had B-52s canceled, Cool and the Gang canceled, Brett Michaels. So they needed bands. They called us up and said, we know you're scheduled for next year, but let's throw a whole bunch of money your way and have you come on right now. And we didn't do it. Grateful that, we stayed healthy. But unfortunately, a handful of those bands did go and they got sick. But
Oh no.
yeah, man, let's hope that there's a cure for all this and we can go and do safe cruises in the future. Was there a reason that you didn't end up doing out of town shows after that cruise?
So when I met you, I had actually already started working for Best Friends Animal Society. So I had already made a pretty huge transition, going from touring full time to working a normal adult job full time. And the Richard Marx team called me, and I'm very flattered to say this. I promise I'm not super name dropping, but they called and asked me if I would do the cruise because their usual guy had to sub out.
Okay.
And I said, I'm so sorry. I don't tour anymore. Like this, it's such a bummer. I'd love to, but I just made a huge life change and I have a day job now. And so I can't do it. Sorry. Send him some recommendations. Like a week later, he calls again. He's like, would you reconsider? And I was like, oh, that's really sweet. Thank you. I genuinely think it would not be a good idea for me. Like, I've made it clear to this job that I will not be taking off to do touring. Like, big life change.
Okay.
So I was like, okay. Another week later, he was like, we legit have nobody. Can you please come do this? You'd be doing us a huge favor. And so I said yes. And
you'd played with Richard before, right?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
A couple times.
Yeah. All right. Sorry.
But I was more of a sub. I was
Okay.
somebody who when their usual guys, when the usual keyboard players weren't available, I would sub in. And he said, we don't have anybody. And I was like, oh, bummer. I'm going to have to go on a cruise, And so I talked to my boss about it at the time. And I was trying to make it clear to her, like, this is not something that I'm going to keep doing. I'm not going to keep asking for a week off to go do something like this because, that wouldn't be kosher. And it ended up being a great experience. I met you. I had an amazing time. I was a newly sober person and I had just prior to going on the cruise hit my 1 year sobriety. And so it felt very like exciting and precarious at the same time. But I just felt like it was an incredible experience. And then I just didn't do anymore after that. I either didn't get called, or the in-town gigs and short tours that I got called for, I said no. That was that.
Yeah. Did I lose you for just a second?
No.
Okay. I switched over because another wonderful music interviewer, Matty Rocks, actually just, he said, hello, I'm bouncing between some of the social media platforms because people started comment in here. But I thought this is really interesting when you mentioned that and you were telling these guys, no, I can't go. So many conversations that I've had with friends on the show are, as soon as the call comes in, you say yes, regardless, right? So know how the business goes. I mean, like
exactly.
if it's feast or famine, and anybody that's out there is a hired gun or session person, everything that comes your way, whether you can do it or not, you say yes.
Right.
I was talking to Kenny Aronoff and some of the guys that look at his deal. Kenny's played on 1,300 gold, platinum, and diamond records. And, the joke is that the only reason that anybody else can get other gigs is because he can only be in one place at the same time, so, but you had the exact opposite, right? You had a life change that required, or, that promoted you to be able to set some boundaries and say, I'm done. Now, playing with Richard Marx and having to say no a bunch of those times, now everybody else out that hears that is like, what? She's got to be crazy, man. How could she say no to this thing? And the show is incredible, of course. I mean, Richard puts on a phenomenal show. He's
so funny.
Oh
he's so funny.
He's, even though, I mean, he knows he's super handsome. He knows he's the object of every woman's attention, but he's a little self-deprecating. He dogs himself a little bit. And then he also laughs about how, all those women are chasing him. It's an entertainment show. It really is. I mean, aside from the fact that the dude has written 1 million hit records and he's the best performer, one of the best out there. But the ensemble was super cool too. I mean, you guys were all seasoned pros. You could tell that.
Oh, thank you.
I think most people from Nashville, he had in the band, right?
So actually at that point he was using primarily, there was a band that was at one point called Harborblinn that was active here in LA, playing in a lot of venues like Hotel Cafe, which is still around, but during that time it was like kind of a heyday of Hotel Cafe. And Harborblinn changed their name shortly after that cruise, I think, to Moscow Roscoe, and I honestly have not kept in touch with every one of them, so I don't know what the status of the band is now, but it was basically that band that ended up meeting Richard, and I can't remember how, but they got to be super good friends. And Richard was like, I just want these guys on the road with me. Like, they're so fun. They're so talented. And they are. And so it was a 4-piece band that he would bring out, and they just didn't have a dedicated keyboard player for a couple of those gigs. And so I was friends with them and they brought me on. But yeah, you're right. They are all seasoned pros. They're incredible songwriters and happen to be some of the most fun people to hang out with, which I think is, you don't get a package like that very often.
Right. Oh, it was his honeymoon too, right? So he was off getting, he just got married to Daisy Fuentes. And so that was, it was kind of an opportunity for him to get a vacation and go out there and play for thousands of people on a cruise ship. I know for me, living in Portland, we got a lot of rain in February and March. And so when a Flock of Seagulls reached out to me and said, hey, you want to go to the Caribbean during February? I was twist my arm, and you're going to pay me? Oh, got to think about that. But and I had at that point too, just a few years under my belt of sobriety as well. And if you're like me, and I know we didn't talk about this before the show, but I was really apprehensive about going on to a cruise with thousands of people with partying everywhere. And I can be around, chaos and drugs and alcohol and all that kind of stuff, and doesn't faze me at all. But I will tell you that at that point, my patience level was lower, so
I bet,
I mean, I hate to say it, but babysitting, like sloppy drunk, was a really tough thing for me at that point, especially. Right. So I didn't know if I could be around it. Grateful that my band members weren't like that. But I didn't know what to expect. And I remember reaching out to the cruise director saying, man, is there any AA or some kind of recovery, anything, and they said, yeah, there's a meeting 4:00 every day in the library. And I said, you got to be kidding me. Every day on a ship, a party ship. And,
I know.
and and it was kind of written into the itinerary for the, for the events, but it really wasn't, really highlighted. And were you surprised to walk into a room and kind of see that other people were there kind of needing a little respite from,
I didn't know what to expect. And so
Yeah.
even though I've, had been a touring musician and done tons of gigs for the last 10 years, I had never been on a cruise gig, believe it or not.
No, me
It was
neither.
just crazy. And so my impression of cruises was like, it's just booze.
Right.
It's just booze flowing from every fountain in every room. That's what I expected it would be. And that was actually one of the reasons I didn't tell them this, but that was one of the reasons why I kept saying no.
Okay.
Is number one, I had a job that I wanted them to know how committed I was to them. But number two, it was like, man, I don't know. I'm about to hit a year and I've had relapse issues and it doesn't feel like it's going to be super safe. So I reached out to my sponsor and I asked her, like, what do people do on these cruises? And she said, look for on the itinerary, friends of Bill W. It's like a secret way of having a meeting without broadcasting it. Right. And I just assumed I was going to be the only person in that room.
Yeah.
Why would anybody go to a cruise sober?
Right.
And the fact that you were there and your wife at the time was there, and there were quite a few very normal, cool people. Right. I was so happy and surprised. And just knowing that was there made me immediately realize that I made the right decision to go.
You know, what's funny that you mentioned the normal thing. I think early in recovery, you don't expect that, right? You expect it to be alien forms of some kind. I mean, somebody, and everybody out there, has got some sort of, support group that can help them out, whether it be relationship stuff or drugs and alcohol or food or sex or whatever. I was just grateful to have other people that, were willing to show up and just kind of commiserate, hang out and talk about something other than the party. But I have to tell the funny story. I mean, this is the one thing that so I think each one of those days, right, the meetings kept getting a little bit bigger. People would find out about the itinerary and they'd start showing up. So a lot of representation from bands and guests and like you said, everybody was super cool, different varying lengths of time that they'd been in recovery. And that one particular meeting, I think I may have chaired and it kind of went around. Everybody kind of shared their story. And so it got to the end where this couple had walked in. This woman had pushed her husband in a wheelchair, and it got to them, and they're looking at every single person in there like we were aliens. And the dude said, I don't know what this is all about. You guys with your discussion of like partying and the girls on the deck, in bikinis doing Twister and well, this is the recovery meeting. We're sharing a story. You're welcome to share. You don't have to. And the woman said, we've been doing this. And they mentioned they were from Austria, right? Like they've been traveling forever. And she said, we've been doing this like every, this is what we do. Instead of a retirement home, we talk to the cruise lines and they put us in different cruises around the world. We travel instead of being a retirement home. They put us on an 80s cruise because then they're in their 80s. And everybody was like, oh my God, these poor people in the midst of this crazy, chaotic party time.
Right. And they probably are looking at us like we're just perpetual liars. Exactly. Like clearly we're not in our 80s.
Right. Yeah.
Who do we think we are?
Oh, and so we were almost to Puerto Rico because I know that was like the halfway point, and that was the jump off point where Richard took. Did he fly in at that point for the wedding, or did he split? I couldn't remember, but that was a jump off point for a lot of people. I thought for sure they're out of there, man. They are heading back to Austria. They're going to find a cruise that little more their demographic. And no, sure enough, every time I'd go up on the deck, I'd see the woman pushing them around and the guys like checking out the bikinis. And I thought, this is the greatest, funniest 80s story I've ever heard in my life. I wonder if they're still out there. Well, hopefully they're safe and they're out, cruising, but
right. It's been about 4 years.
Yeah.
We should check on them. We should find a way to check.
Well, A Flock of Seagulls is booked next year. If they show up, in March, I'll let you know. But yeah, man. So you mentioned that was one of the reasons that kind of you wanted to get off the road. I mean, so you've been touring for a long time. You want to talk a little bit about your music history and how that path kind of led you into, okay, enough boundaries.
I know. People do think I'm crazy when I talk about the fact that I had a music career. And it was, give or take a few months, it was 10 years. I was full-time music. So it started because I took piano lessons as a kid, and truly I hated it. I was the demon child student for all the piano teachers I had. I would like rip up my books
Oh,
and not practice. And I was a snotty kid.
yeah.
But my parents were like, no, we quit lessons when we were kids and we wish we'd have stuck with it. So you have to. For 10 years, I took lessons as a kid. And finally, I think they got the message that like, she hates this.
Yeah.
So they let me quit. And it wasn't shortly after that that I one day rolled the piano, our family upright piano, from the living room. I pushed it down the hallway myself into my room because I was like, I want this all to myself and no one else is using it. And I hated playing in front of people.
Really?
Major stage fright from day one. I hated it. And so I was like, well, I don't have a solution. I'll push the piano in my room. And ever since then, it was my best friend. It was, I finally found that when somebody wasn't forcing me to do it, I actually wanted to do it. It's a classic kid story.
Totally.
So I went to school in Nashville. I went to college in Nashville at Belmont University. And the reason I chose Belmont was because they had a program for film scoring, just anything that wasn't teaching and anything that wasn't performing, because the majority of music degrees you can get are one of those two things. And I was like, I don't want those.
Yeah.
I'm never going to do that. So I want to do something behind the scenes. And I went to Nashville and had an amazing time at school. But the best part of going to Belmont was not necessarily anything you learn at school. It was by just being in Nashville and mixing in with all the other musicians and getting familiar with what it's like to, be in a town that runs solely on that fuel of people in the music industry. I'm not sure how the change happened. I bet some friends of mine who've known me since then could tell you better. But at some point, I started performing. I think it was because I saw a lot of friends of mine who were doing it, and I was a little jealous.
Oh, yeah.
They're doing all these gigs, and I think I can do that. So I started performing with different bands. And of course, when you first start out, you do a lot of stuff for free. You play a lot of music that maybe you're not super passionate about, but you just take the gigs. And pretty soon it grew from, I had one band I was playing with. A few months later, I was playing with 10 bands. And then a couple of years after that, the roster of people that I had played with and was continuing to play with was just like, I was pretty impressed with myself. But I have to say that doesn't happen to everybody. It doesn't happen in every town. Nashville was special at that time because it was a place for me.
It's crazy. Your story is so different than every other Nashville person I've talked to.
Seriously?
Because, oh man, you know how many people I know that have gone to Nashville with aspirations of being a songwriter or a famous musician, and they come back home with their tail between their legs because they cannot break into that scene. It's a really, I know that they're very protective of their community. So the musical community is really warm and they love each other there. But if you come in from out of town and you're trying to snake some of those gigs, if you don't have that same sort of connection with people, and it looks like you're trying to move you up the ladder, boom, they're not letting you in, right? So
it's very true. And it's a boys club. That was the only kind of ceiling that I felt like I hit. Was the guys who did all of the sessions for all the country artists, the demos, like that was a club of people that just never changed.
Sure.
And so where I did find that I could work a lot was with live gigs. But you're right. You're totally right. If you're trying to break into the songwriting side, or if you're an attractive blonde female singer, there's a lot of competition for that. But I think I really liked synth pop. I really like different styles of playing keyboard, so I could fully hack it with the country gigs.
Yeah.
But I had under my belt this, this ear for synth. And so it was around the time when I think people were realizing like, oh, it's kind of cool to have a girl in the band. And so there was like, I would sometimes get gigs because it was advertised just as we would like a female keyboard player. And I'm like, okay.
Wow.
So I felt like there was a place for me there. And I just started gigging like crazy. And one of the things that really helped with my performance anxiety and playing in front of people was alcohol. It makes everything easy, right?
Of course, liquid courage. Yep.
So I quickly developed a routine of like arrive, at the venue at least a certain amount of time prior to the gig, get liquefied, and then play and have an amazing time. And Nashville, really, the social currency runs on alcohol.
Yeah.
And so those two things just, propelled me forward. And I just felt like, man, this is the life. This is great. And then about 2009, a couple close friends of mine who I really looked up to as far as like gig players were moving out to LA. And I thought, I can do that too. And I didn't know what I was getting into because it's a different world out in LA. It's very much based on what you look like, how young you are. Whereas in Nashville, I think what I prided myself on was I can play like the boys. I can party like the boys. Like I have this niche that I've created for myself, and it didn't really revolve on what I looked like. It revolved on my skill.
Yeah.
And I was very proud of that. And I get out to LA and I'm like, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Do you look like you're 18? Will you wear a bikini on stage? You're in.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's an adjustment.
I shouldn't act surprised actually, but I think about that. I mean, LA, that the Hollywood scene, of course, is the aesthetic. It's a big part of it, but you just made me think about some of the other actors turned musicians that I know there that was the big gimmick, right? Was to bring in attractive, scantily clad women. And that was the draw. They didn't have to be any substantive or, sort of sophisticated music at all.
Right.
I think that's probably, the case for a lot of pop driven stuff, right? I mean, if you think about hip hop or pop music, I don't want to say that's the case for all, certainly not for a Flock of Seagulls, but no, but I mean, really, the commercial side of things, sex sells, and they really know how to drive that home. But I think about your journey, it's a really interesting path that you took when you said that you followed your friends out to LA. Did you have a sort of a built-in band with those friends that you could go and start gigging right away? Or did you have any other contacts that were based in LA?
I had like 2 or 3.
Okay.
But those 2 or 3 people I had put a lot of faith in and trust in as friends. I think, when you're in the entertainment industry, you do find a couple people that you will give up a gig for them any day. It's just kind of like they're your family. And those are the people that I had contacts with in LA. And so I didn't really have any built-in work coming. I had one goal. And I think that's what worked well for me, was that I just narrowed my focus. I wasn't going out there to like, I want to be a musician, maybe write, maybe act. I don't know. I had one singular goal, and that was to get on a internationally touring pop gig.
Okay.
I wanted. And so every single person I met when I moved to LA, when I was like networking, going out to shows, I said that one thing, like, that's what I'm looking for. And so everyone who met me had that in the forefront of their mind, I think. I did have an advantage with the hotel cafe group of friends.
Okay.
Because once I started going there, the couple contacts that I had very graciously introduced me to everybody there.
Really?
And I just kept going and going, and I drank a ton. Pretty soon I was getting in for free, drinking for free. And so it was like my spot. Yeah. And I think at one point I left my gear in the green room because I was playing there so much, because I was just meeting people really fast. And I can't remember how long I'd been in LA. It wasn't that long, but I got called to audition for Kesha.
Okay.
I want to say it was the very end of 2009 where they called the first time. And because Kesha actually is from Nashville, she was living in LA at the time, but she started in Nashville. And so I think her management company reached out to some Nashville people and said, we're looking for a female keyboard player. And they recommended me because I had a lot of contacts in Nashville.
Yeah. And
then they called some people in LA. We need a female keyboard player. Who do you recommend? They recommended me.
No way. So from both?
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah, totally. So that was incredible. And that was, it was just too perfect, right? It was exactly what I moved out to LA for. So they ended up, I think she was doing a bunch of promo, and I didn't end up officially auditioning until like April of 2010, which I auditioned 2 days before they played SNL. So I missed it on SNL, right? The first time.
Man, yeah, that's a big gig, but you probably
kind of a bummer. But it went really well. And I played for her solid for 4 years, and I was touring internationally, checking off like everything on my bucket list.
So travel's a big part of that bucket list, and like places.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think too, an unspoken thing on my bucket list was having the respect of my peers.
You bet.
And I felt like I really got that because I would go out and play, internationally, and I'd come back from a tour and go back to my friends at Hotel Cafe, and everyone was like, yeah, they're so happy for me. And it's like I got what I wanted. And that made me feel really good and really accomplished. And for my personality type, like just recognition is huge. Makes me happy. And so, yeah.
I think that's pretty common, right? For almost every musician.
Probably.
Well, I mean,
Not new.
it's certainly my ideal. I know that the challenge for me right now in the pandemic is that I could sit in my garage and play drums, but that's not where I want to be playing drums. I want to be on stage, interacting with the band, interacting with people in the crowd. And it's an ego-driven sort of thing. And also, I mean, and I hate to admit it that way, but it's what fulfills me in a big way. Not just the adoration of people from the crowd, but being able to interact with those people. I feel like, it's a conversation we can have playing, right? And so when you did the Kesha thing, how was that? She had a big band at one point, right? So were there quite a few people in that group?
It's funny. They were dancers.
Oh, that's what I think about when I think of so many people on stage. They're dancers.
A ton of people on stage.
Yeah.
So it was interesting because in the very beginning, the majority of the music that you would hear at a gig was live. And I think we were right on that cusp. This is like, 2010, 2011, right on that cusp of like how to put on a big blockbuster live show with the coordination of tracks and live music.
Right.
Like we're navigating that. All of her hits are heavily electronic.
Sure.
And so that gave me a ton of parts that I could say, like, let me do this, this, and this. I can cover these things, and then the rest probably has got to be track.
Sure.
But we had, I think, 4 people typically in the band.
Okay.
And she played as well. She'll occasionally play guitar and keys.
Okay.
And then dancers, which was awesome because
Yeah.
they would occasionally also like participate and like grab a guitar and play or sing some backup. Like it was just a big old circus is what we wanted it to be.
That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was certainly the biggest time of her success too, right? So you guys are doing major shows and probably a lot of TV performances, even if you didn't do SNL, right? So you did the standard network of Kimmel, of Fallon, like Conan, all that. That's cool. Yeah. Any memorable experiences you want to share about any of those times?
Conan was memorable for me because I was wicked nervous. I don't know, we'd done a ton of late night TV, all of that. And this was probably 2 to 3 years in, I think. But she had a song that was a single at one point called Animal off of her first big record. And it was, we had sort of crafted, the MD for the most part at the time had written this like pretty big piano intro, just a very like orchestral sounding, but on piano. And it was a little difficult to play. And right before that show, we decided to change the key so that she would feel a little more confident. We took it down a half step, which meant white keys, black keys for me.
Yeah.
Big change. And I could have cheated and I could have transposed my keyboard, but I would not. I will not do that. And so I was pretty nervous going in, and I had an interesting like physical experience. We did a run through for camera blocking, and then we went live. And when we went live, for whatever reason, I couldn't take a deep breath properly. And my hands went numb from the elbows down.
Wow.
Like I lost my circulation. And I started to get that like, oh, I might pass out, that like black coming in on the sides. I just had a moment of full anxiety. And I like out of body experience. I honestly didn't know if I played the right notes until we listened to the playback later. And I was like, oh, okay, that's good.
You nailed it. Were you singing too? Singing backups?
On that one, yeah, a little bit. My backup singing was not my strong point. And so like I would do gang vocal stuff.
Yeah.
And so, like I wasn't as stressed about that, thankfully.
But I'm thinking if you can't breathe, it's impossible to sing too, So I hold my breath sometimes when we play. It's a weird thing. I have to chew gum. It's not a nerve thing, but if I'm not chewing my gum, then I hold my breath. And so my hands will go numb too, And so it's such a weird thing. And it's not like stage fright or anything like that. I just, I'm so focused on the moment of what I'm doing that I forget to breathe. And so, I mean,
I'm pretty sure mine is stage fright. I have classic like anxiety all over the place. And I think that one was just like, it just got me.
Yeah. Well, if you had I mean, I know one thing about Conan for sure. He's such a personable guy. If you got
Mhm.
time to hang with him prior, he probably would have put you right at ease.
Well, he did. He came and said hi. He was super nice and said hi to the band specifically because when you're with an artist at Kesha's level,
yeah,
she's got her entourage and she could be friends with all of us, but that doesn't mean that like we're all going to be in the same room pre-show.
yeah,
She's got her room with makeup and hair and all of that, and the band we get our room. And so it's always nice when a host of a show will come and say hi to the band specifically. It's like you remembered us.
yeah. Man, he's that guy for sure. I ran into him a couple years ago in Austin. A Flock of Seagulls was doing a benefit show at a Four Seasons in Austin, and
Oh,
right outside the elevator, they had a big poster for the event. It was a radio promo, and had pictures of the band. So I wasn't feeling well. The band went ahead of me. I went to the little store and got some like anti. I think maybe I just got some Advil or something. But anyway, get on the elevator. Door gets stopped. A hand pushes its way in, and in comes Conan OBrien. I'm like, hey, what's going on? He's so tall, right? He's
I know.
like 8 feet taller. But um, and he said, "Oh, hey, Flock of Seagulls." I'm like, how did you know? And he goes, "Well, I saw you on the poster. Your hair matches the poster, And I'm like, "Oh, yeah." I said, he said, "Man, you got more lift in your hair than I do." And we had a little joke, and we have a mutual friend, a classmate of mine from high school, is his most commonly booked guest on the show, Sarah Vowell. She's an NPR host and an author. She's done a lot. She's the voice of Violet, the Invisible Girl on Incredibles. And so she's on Conan all the time. And I brought it up to him, and he said, "Why don't you come up and hang out for a little bit?" So we went upstairs and talked for like 20 minutes. And he said, "I'm not able to come to your show, but I'm hosting a thing at Austin City Limits. So if you guys want to come, I'd love to bring the band in if you want to come." And so our singer didn't go, but the rest of the band, we went and hung out and did Austin City Limits as a courtesy guest of Conan OBrien.
It's
It
so
was
nice.
it was such a nice guy, man. So enough about my story. Sorry.
No, that's really cool. I love hearing that because you really do, when you work in this industry, you find out that there are some just extremely down to earth, awesome people. And then there are a handful who are what their reputation,
Right.
their bad reputation might be, but definitely not the norm.
I talk about this often, all right, about people's personalities. And you and I both know somebody might have a bad day, and the reputation comes from the one day that somebody met where, whatever, they got up on the wrong side of the bed, or, their animal was sick or something, So
Mm-hmm.
I try to give people the benefit of the doubt, and I try not to judge too much. But I think if you approach people that way, it's certainly helpful too. We're all the same underneath, right? So whether they're a Kesha or Conan or the little drummer guy or whatever, we underneath the skin, we look the same. So hopefully those people are approachable that way. Now, so the Kesha thing, you said 4 years, did a lot of touring during that time.
It was,
Pretty heavy.
solid. Yeah, it was, I would say on an average, I was gone 9 to 10 months out of the year.
Wow.
I would, it was the most intense experience of touring I'd ever had because working in Nashville, I'd worked with quite a few different artists, but not the solid chunks of tour. I think at that point, the longest tour I'd been on was 4 months.
Okay.
A short little couple day break in there, but 4 months. And so this was a new experience. I had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder coming from Nashville because I'm like, I'm a really good player, and everybody here is all about looks. And so that got worn down, and I got kind of humbled in certain areas during those tours, but I also felt like I was right where I was supposed to be.
Okay.
In my skill set and the kind of music that I really enjoyed listening to and playing, like that's what we were doing.
That's cool.
So yeah, and Kesha, to her credit, is one of the nicest people in the industry. She's so warm. She can be kind of shy sometimes.
Really?
That whole image that was created for her on that first record of being the party girl is not entirely accurate.
Yeah.
She's kind of like a family. She likes to stay close with her family. She brought her cat on the road at one point, and this was what will segue into me and my whole animal career.
Sure.
But she had a cat, Mr. Peeps.
Okay.
Who would come on the road with her and was on her bus. And I had gone through one bout of attempted sobriety and then relapse, and I was having a lot of mental health stuff bubble up because of that.
You bet.
And I realized that I grew up with cats in my family, and I hadn't had one because I can't have one. I'm on tour all the time.
Oh
I can't have
yeah.
a pet. I was like, you know what? Fuck it. I can. I'm going to figure it out. So I went and adopted a cat on one of our breaks.
Really?
And, yes.
Oh,
And I told her about it. She was like, you should bring him on tour.
oh my
So I
God.
did. And his name is Mr. Miyagi. And actually, at one point, a Kesha fan had created a Twitter account for him, and it had
Oh,
more followers than I would ever have. Like, he was his own celebrity.
that is awesome.
Yeah. And so I would take him on our US tours internationally. If we were going to go there, I would fly him to my parents' house and they would take care of him while I was overseas. But that was a huge motivation for me to start realizing that there were things about life on the road that were causing me harm.
Yeah.
It's nobody's fault, but it was just that lifestyle, the fact that I could not stay sober. I was gonna relapse. Like, I just didn't have it in me to separate those two things. And so I made a really hard decision while we were on a break. I decided that I just didn't know if my heart was in this anymore. Basically what happened, I think this was in the news, so I don't feel bad sharing this, but Kesha went to rehab for an
Right.
eating disorder at the beginning of, I want to say 2015.
Okay.
So we had a pretty good break.
Yeah.
And I started taking other gigs in the meantime, and it wasn't quite paying the bills the way that I was used to having this like
Sure.
set gig. And I would get calls for auditions for gigs that I wasn't excited about, and I couldn't make myself go do it. I was like, man, I'm either really spoiled or just something isn't clicking with me anymore, because I don't want to do a gig where I think the music is shit.
Right.
I'm
Just
not.
for a paycheck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was a huge realization for me, that something had separated from me, where my dreams and my aspirations were not being fulfilled if it wasn't like I wanted just my Kesha gig back, and it wasn't coming back because we were on a break. And even if it was going to come back, I was going to mess it up by just being an absolute lush the whole time.
Did Kesha know about your okay.
Yeah, and she was very supportive. And she looked out for me a lot. I think when she would see me like at the end of the night post show going down that path, she would she would look out for me. But it was nobody's responsibility but my own.
Sure. It's nice to know that there was some support though. You know, did you have like were you working with a sponsor or anything at that point as well?
I think I had really not communicated with my sponsor at that point.
All right. So, you know, you got the guilt, you got the shame, you got all the other stuff that goes along with relapse. And and because you're on a hectic schedule, probably tough to make meetings or anything like that, right?
Oh yeah, I didn't even bother.
Yeah. That I ask because, you know, a lot of friends of mine that are touring and, you know, obviously not right now, but you know, have talked about sort of the challenges of finding a new way to navigate that. You know, if you have to be on the road, thank goodness there are meetings, millions of meetings.
Oh, totally.
Every hour of the day.
You can do it.
Yeah, for sure. Even now, you know, in a pandemic, doing Zoom meetings and everything else is the way to go to make, you know, some effort towards it. But yeah, and you know, early sobriety, when you're really stuck with all of those other things that go into relapse, you know, it's a challenge. So you had a big break, and she had her rehab session where she went in for her eating disorder. Yeah. So what happened with Jenn when she came home?
So when I was home, I was still like full active addiction, and living in LA, paying LA rent. It's not cheap. No. And going out, I managed to find those like late night places, you know, stay open until 5 a.m., 6 a.m. And then you hop over to the 6 a.m. bars. I was going on benders, like 30 to 40 hour benders, chunks of time where I was just losing time. And that really scared me. And actually, one of the gigs I did with Richard before the cruise, they had called me to sub in last minute, and I was in the middle of a bender when they called. And I was like, yes, I will totally do that. And I'll be at the rehearsal at this time, you know, last minute rehearsal. That rehearsal came and went, and I was not there. And I can't remember what excuse I made up, but they had enough faith in me that I was going to get on that plane and meet them at the gig. So I did, I think, my first gig with Richard with no rehearsal. And thankfully I had skills from years of playing that I could rely on and a backup, because I had not done the work to prepare, but it was fine. It worked out fine. I don't recommend it. But
Fortunately, man, because the reputation is so big in the business, right? When word of mouth goes, yeah, if they find that you're not responsible, not reliable, boom,
yeah,
you're out, but
it's like you need to, for most touring gigs, it's like you maintain the impression on the outside that you're like super fun, party all the time.
right.
And then, but you can't do that
Yeah.
because you will lose your job.
Right.
It's an interesting little dichotomy. But so while Kesha was on break, I was doing these other gigs, here and there. And my cocaine use was shooting through the roof along with drinking. And I started to get really scared,
Yeah.
like waking up in places, the whole story. Everyone has very similar stories with addiction. So I decided to get sober and it stuck. It just stuck. And one of the reasons it stuck was because I just started saying no to gigs, had enough of a savings, credit card savings to get me through a couple months and figure some shit out. And during that time, I started thinking, well, if I'm going to get another job, there's got to get something to pay the bills and then I'll figure it out as I go.
Okay.
And huge lucky thing happened to me, which might be the story of my life. I've had a lot of episodes like this where it's just everything aligned perfectly. The first and only job I applied for was with a company called Best Friends.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I applied online and it was related to cats. I had zero experience. I've never worked in animal welfare. There's no reason why they should hire me. I got the job. And I think because just that sort of miracle moment helped me realize like there is a light at the end of this tunnel. This is not just going to be any job. Oh, you're bringing up the website, aren't you?
I hope you don't mind. Yeah.
Not at all.
The fascinating thing about that is that if this gig came, it really was like the universe looking your way. Right. So
totally. I'm so lucky, man. I'm so lucky.
You've been with them for a while now.
5 years.
Okay.
So I started in 2015 and started working with them at the very bottom, the lowest job you can have. I was a field worker, basically going out and doing trap, neuter, return for cats in the area of San Fernando Valley and helping to put them through surgery to get spayed and neutered through a high volume spay neuter clinic. For anyone who doesn't know what trap, neuter, return is, just look it up. You'll find tons of info. I don't feel like I want to have like an educational acronyms that I'll use.
Sure.
But I started at the bottom of that organization and my boss who had hired me, who took the chance on me, knowing that I didn't have any experience, was really my advocate and my mentor throughout this whole process. And she believes in me. She has become a friend of mine and she has helped me to get promoted through the organization to where I'm at now, where I've been working from home pre-pandemic. I've been working from home as a supervisor over programs that implement cat life-saving within shelters across the country. So every municipal animal shelter that you would surrender a dog or cat to or adopt a dog or cat from, we are making connections with them and trying to implement programs to help them save more lives. And I get to sit home in my pajamas.
Oh my gosh.
And do that work. And also that frees me up to do fostering for kittens and bottle babies. Because I work from home, I was able to move out of the LA sprawl where I'd been living and buy a house up in an area called Crestline, which is north of San Bernardino in the mountains. I'm at 5,000 feet elevation. We get snow in the winter.
Wow.
But I could move to this area, which felt so adventurous, and I could afford to put a down payment on a house. Like, who can do that in Southern California?
No, not unless you're Kesha.
Yeah. I feel like I hit the jackpot. I won the lottery multiple times in life over the last 10 years or so in being able to just be ushered into these like new experiences and having this job, being passionate about it. It's like I got to do my one dream job and now I'm doing another dream job.
Yeah, that really is lightning striking twice, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's when this conversation has happened so many times, I hope people that are watching aren't sick of me talking about this comparison. But most guests or friends of mine that talk about this talk about how lucky they are, and I think, well, you know what? To me, I perceive it as fortune, right? Because luck is just chance. It's just stuff that just happens without having any preparation. There's no way you'd get the Kesha gig or any of those other gigs had you not put in the time and the effort and worked on the networking and worked on your personality and your personal skills in order to be a good hang for those bands. And
Yeah.
In this environment, you know, being an animal lover, being a cat lover, and having the passionate about it is what I'm sure your boss saw in you when you first took that job.
Yeah.
Maybe sort of paved the way for trust and respect, and she could see that there was a diamond in the rough, you know,
No.
for early Jen. So, you know, you've moved into a supervisor position. You mentioned also fostering kittens right now, so you have a whole bunch of kittens there that you've taken in.
I wanted so badly for this to like align around the
Yeah.
time when I had, because just 2 weeks ago I had 9 kittens
Wow.
in my
Okay.
guest room, my guest bathroom. And yeah, because if they come from different families, different litters or locations, you really got to keep them separate so they don't
Okay.
spread disease and just
Sure.
basic practices. So yeah, I had a bunch, and it just so happens that there's a bit of a lull right now that I don't have any. Part of that is that I'm looking forward to possibly going to Hawaii for 2 months or so coming up at the end of this year. There's a program that we're starting at a shelter in Hawaii, and we've wanted to work with this location for a long time.
Really?
Hawaii, being an island, has a totally different culture, a different approach to sheltering, and I think they've had a lot of struggles along the way.
Sure.
And so we have this in to go and start a cat program there, and they're sending me, which is incredible. So I can't really have any fosters if I'm getting ready
Sure.
to travel.
You're going to be in the Big Island then?
Yeah, the Big Island.
Okay. And so Kailua, is that where the shelter is, or is it in Hilo?
It is no Kailua. It
Oh,
is
it
not
is. Okay.
Hilo. They have a location that they used to use in Hilo, but the location in Kailua is actually going to service the whole island, which is a
Okay.
huge challenge.
That I bet. And I remember that's the only island I've been to in
Yeah,
Hawaii, and
really?
spent a few weeks there. And I remember a pretty large feral cat population, especially, you know, to certain areas of the island. So
Yep.
I would think that with shelters, yeah, there are some challenges there for sure. Uh,
Yes.
you know, it's interesting about some of the parallels, Jen. When I looked at the work that you do with Best Friends,
Mhm.
and their approach was to talk about these homeless, these animals they referred to them as homeless, right? And a few years ago here in Portland, about the time that you and I met, actually,
Mhm.
I started working with an outreach organization, a gal that I eventually started dating. We started a nonprofit that was for homeless outreach, because I saw inner city Portland struggling. I know that everywhere we would tour, I mean, you know, LA,
Yeah.
every city in the country right now is really suffering from rents pushing people out, mental illness, all these kinds of things are driving people towards the houselessness. And
Mhm.
so I felt a little bit desperate at one point, because I wanted to do something to help. I wanted to be able to do an outreach where we could provide services and clothing and any kind of like dental care or, you know, mental health facility, and job transitions if that was a possibility, any kind of shelter opportunities. And sometimes it felt like a futile effort, because even though you knew you were making some progress, even if you could help one family or one person, there were thousands of others that needed the help since that time. And we had to shutter the nonprofit this year, and really focus on stuff that was really close to home.
Yeah.
I felt a sense of grief and guilt about not being able to help people. I think the same thing about animals. I mean, a lot of people that wanted to contribute to these outreaches and help, they knew that there were animals living with these people that had either come from homes that they'd been displaced, or they'd find them on the streets.
Mhm.
And so people a lot of times would provide food or, you know, something to help the animals. And as you and I both know, the companionship, the unconditional love that you get from our pets is truly one of the most amazing gifts. You know, I know for myself, it really is. It's been a lifesaver.
Yep. Me too.
So I resonated with your decision to just focus your energy and your time onto these houseless animals, these, you know,
Mhm.
kitties and dogs. And so when Best Friends really takes their focus, their approach, from what I understand, is they'll go to shelters and really provide no-kill alternatives, right? Those types of shelters that maybe had euthanization as an alternative, you know, early on, you're trying to provide alternative answers to this. Is that right?
Yeah. So
Okay.
I guess the old model of sheltering, I mean, animal shelters have been around since the 1800s, and it was originally started actually it was a health crisis, I believe. I don't know a ton about this, but I've heard people talk about it. But, you know, a rabies crisis or a health crisis that caused them to round up primarily dogs at the time and kill them. And so as sheltering moved into the century we're in now, it hasn't changed much in terms of the concept and in terms of the service that they think they need to provide for people. So your taxpayer dollars are basically being funneled into an organization that is removing health or, you know, unhealthy things from the environment is kind of the idea.
Yeah.
What we're trying to do is bring awareness to the difference between sheltering and how it impacts dogs and how it impacts cats, because you can't have one building that addresses all those needs. It's different. We're also, especially in this time, this is probably, I think animal welfare in general has the biggest silver lining of COVID. We've seen such a growth in fosters and public interest, community interest in their shelters that I don't think you could have asked for in any other way other than an international disaster.
Right.
People are coming out of the woodwork and starting to realize, oh, my local shelter needs me. And we're helping shelters engage with the community so that they can be a resource for fundraising, for adoptions, for fostering. In all of these programs work together so that you don't have to euthanize for space. You don't have to reach your full capacity and then be forced to euthanize. And I think realizing that and that there's a different way to do things is hard for some people who've worked in sheltering. It's like, oh, you mean there was another way?
Right.
I didn't have to spend my career injecting, you know, animals. It's tough because it's emotional. No one gets into animal welfare because they don't like animals. They love animals, and I think you get beat down.
Yeah.
And so it's a tough road to meet with some of these shelter directors and give them these options, and then you kind of watch it dawn on them, like, oh, I maybe didn't have to euthanize all the dogs and cats prior. So it's a little bit of social work. It's a little bit of animal welfare all rolled into one with a psychology degree and community activism.
Yeah. So do you have your psych degree? That comes in handy.
I don't even have it. I wish I did.
Yeah. Well, the way that, I guess, the diplomacy that you need and the way that you communicate this message to these shelter directors, it has got to be so cautious, right? Because, you know, you don't want to alienate them. You don't want to have them just discard your idea because that's not what they're used to. But, you know, I think anybody that realizes that that's what shelters had done previously wants to be somehow supportive, either they're donating money and resources to shelters, or they're, you know, opting to not go to puppy farms or breeders or anything like that, you know, and going to shelters to be able to adopt. I know this might sound, you know, cliche or ignorant, but I'd love for you to kind of deliver some information to people, like what are the best ways that they can support their shelters and especially a no-kill environment.
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is there is a lot of charged language around no kill. Okay. And just understand that going in. I make the joke all the time that animal welfare is kind of like religion. There are all these different denominations, and the tiniest differences means you will not get along.
Okay.
But we're trying, the only way that we're going to get to a goal that we've set as best friends, which is to be no kill this entire country, no kill by 2025. The only way we're going to get there is to collaborate and reach out with all of these groups that we might disagree on one thing, but we love animals and our goal is the same, that these animals don't have to die. So the problem around no kill language is that it can be confusing for some people who've never heard it before. No kill for us means 90% benchmark. So nose is in, nose is out. 90% of those made it out alive.
Okay.
And the reason that we allow for 10% and still call it no kill is because there's a difference between killing and euthanasia.
Okay.
Euthanasia is a humane outcome for an animal that is suffering. If you get a cat hit by a car and you bring it into a shelter, the most humane thing they can do is euthanize it quickly.
Okay. Yeah.
You know, and that is a service that the shelter should continue to provide for people.
Okay.
And so there is also, if an owner brings their dog, let's say their elderly dog who has medical problems that are not fixable, not only can they not afford it from a regular vet, but also this dog is suffering in late stage cancer, something like that. They can't afford to have a regular vet euthanize that animal, so the shelter provides that service, which we call owner requested or owner intended euthanasia.
Okay.
That is something that we still want the shelter to provide, and to understand that we don't count that as a negative outcome.
Okay.
Right? That's not death. That's
Sure.
not killing for space. That's not
Right.
killing a kitten that's healthy because you
Right.
don't have a family to take it. So we allow for 10%. And that's why the benchmark is 90% for no kill. So what we aim to do is to make connections with the shelters across our country that have the largest gap to 90%. The ones that are really struggling. One of the biggest success stories we have is down in Palm Valley, Texas, where we came in. I think they take in 35,000 animals a year.
Oh my
Down
gosh.
there. And they do not have the community that can support adoptions. You can't
Right.
adopt your way out of this, right?
Right.
And so we went down there, and within, I want to say, a year's time of implementing a bunch of programs, including return to field, trap, neuter, return for cats, which I'll explain in more detail later, we were able to get them to a 90% save rate.
Incredible.
I mean, it's incredible. Right. And it's making small changes to the interaction with the community, and it's making small changes to policy in the shelter, and you can have a miracle. Really, you can. And so we're bringing this message all over the country, basically.
Not just the shelters, but people need to understand that too, because animal owners and people that are looking for animals, right? If they can find this information, it's just, educating themselves, sort of preventing, the unwarranted loss of these animals because you've done your education. So yeah, you want to explain a little bit about then that process?
Sure. So I think one thing too to remember is that the shelters aren't the bad guys. If you find out, like if you go and research the shelter in your community, your county or your city shelter, and you see that they're euthanizing 58% of the animals that come in, don't think that they're bad people. Don't let that be a stigma on them. A lot of it is resource desert. Right. A lot of it is just a lack of funding. And we have programs for all of that. Yeah. We have experts in all of those areas. But specific to the life-saving gap. So what we're finding in all the data that we've collected about these shelters around the country is that cats are dying more than dogs. Okay. But for whatever reason, up until now, a lot of local smaller rescue groups have been super helpful in pulling dogs from the shelter and helping with being partnered with the shelter to get those animals out and adopted out. Sure. For some reason, we're not seeing that with cats. So we said, why? And it turns out that feral cats and tiny baby kittens are the two buckets of animals that are losing their lives still because shelters don't have the resources or the programming to save them. And understandably so. Sure. Why you would bring a feral cat into a shelter and expect it to somehow be adopted out? Right. That's not going to happen. Yeah. So we're not doing right by those cats. One of the things that we do is a return to field program where we allow members of the public to bring in feral cats, but instead of saying thank you for that cat, see you later, and have them not know what happened to it, or sometimes the members of the public think they're being a good Samaritan, like, I just found this cat on the street, it's kind of super mean, I don't know what to do, you take it. We haven't adequately communicated as the animal welfare movement to the public what that means. Okay. That when you bring that cat in, that cat is going to die. Now, you might be okay with that. Most people aren't. Most people, if they're really confronted with that information, say, no, I don't want that cat to die. I just don't want it pooping in my yard. Right. I just don't want to deal with it. What should I do? Sure. So we have programming that allows the shelter to communicate better with the public and say, we're no longer going to provide the service of euthanizing feral cats to you. Here's what we're going to do instead. Your taxpayer dollars are instead going to be spent spaying and neutering these cats, vaccinating them, returning them back to their community where they came from. Okay. Where over time, science says that the number of cats in a community will eventually decrease to zero. Sure. It might take years, but eventually the colony, as we call it, or group, whatever term some people use, of cats in that area will decrease. What doesn't work, which we've tried for decades, is when you round them up and kill them. Yeah. So if you remove cats from that community that they're used to, it'll fill up with other cats. Sure. Because the care and capacity, kind of like other species of wildlife, sure, they will grow and repopulate to the care and capacity of the environment. Okay. So science shows that trap and kill doesn't work, okay, but trap and spay, neuter, and return does. It's just hard for some people who don't want the cats in their yard, right? You're going to have an angry neighbor who's like, the lady next door feeds 30 cats and the smell is so bad. So we have ways of explaining to them, here's how you can help. Here's how you can keep cats out of your yard. We understand you're frustrated, but killing the cats isn't going to help you. So here,
Yeah.
let's help you this way instead.
Boy, that's the communication method is really key, but it's great to know for me. I mean, it's an education that I didn't expect. It makes sense. It's a very humane thing to do, to be like to spay and neuter and vaccinate. And then when you return them, they're still out in their community. They know that environment, right? So that's a way for them to coexist with their species and then live the life that they were sort of put here to do,
Yeah,
other than procreate, right? So, and spread disease.
exactly. Just don't make any more babies, please.
Yeah, yes. I think, it's interesting to me. I've got a lot of friends that have really focused time and energy on dedicating their passion towards helping animals, a variety of kinds. And so, whether it be cats, dogs, I went to an elephant sanctuary in Thailand last year that now I really wanted to go, and I wanted to see where these elephants had been given an opportunity to, I mean, they had been paraded around in downtown Bangkok on the concrete for people to ride on. And it was heartbreaking. And it really was emotionally draining to be there. The shelter that I went to was still funded somewhat by tourism coming in and taking pictures. And they said, we're desperate to own our land because they were leasing this land. They were dependent on people contributing finances and other resources and volunteer work to make sure that we're not going to allow people to ride these animals. And that because they didn't own the land, but they had at least people would jump, like poachers would jump the walls and come in and harvest the tusks. And it was really heartbreaking, but also life-changing for me. I was smitten with these animals. They were so beautiful and wonderful. And to meet these Thai handlers that would dedicate their life. Each elephant had one person whose entire life was dedicated to that one animal for the rest of their life. And to me, it was like a pairing of, two doves, I mean, mating, just to like, that unconditional caring and love was something special. So it means a lot to me, to know that this is the path you went on. You mentioned that you hadn't been touring, and I think seeing that you can change the world in all sorts of really positive ways, just one kitty at a time, I think is a gorgeous thing. What do you envision? I mean, you said 2025 is when you expect to have your plan, and your goal is to have the shelters to get to that point where you've just got that 10% margin, right?
Yeah.
And you've been in the organization about that much time already. So are you seeing that you're actually actively getting to that goal? Are you on track to actually make that number?
Yeah, it's really encouraging. Honestly, when we first set that goal, it seemed bonkers.
Sure.
I didn't know how that was going to happen. And I have to say that before COVID, I still felt like I'm not sure how we're going to do this. The pandemic has changed everything in animal sheltering, and in such a good way. I wish it didn't have to be that way, but it
Yeah.
really has changed so much. I think the pleas that shelters put out to their community saying, look, we have to close our doors. These animals need somewhere to go. Will you help? You're working from home now.
Yeah.
Maybe you can take a dog or a cat home.
Right.
That really resonated with people. And the shelter that I am supervising right now is Stanislaus Animal Services in Modesto. So I have two best friend staff people down there, or up there for me, up there, that I am overseeing, and they are doing a program in that shelter. Around the time that the pandemic became very clear that we were going to have to shut our doors, we actually made the news in the New York Times, our shelter.
Wow,
Because
really?
they cleared out all the kennels, dogs and cats. They were empty. And I can't remember how many days it took, but it was so fast. And up until this point, I think the shelter felt like the community didn't support them. It was hard to ask for help. It's hard to ask for fosters, and this changed all that. There's a partnership there now. And I think going forward to 2025, what you're going to see more and more is the community helping the shelter and being more partnered with them in ways that they didn't know that they were needed. It was just like a lack of information and a lack of communication. And this has changed all that. So it is very much possible. It's a ton of work. We have a ton of work ahead of us. Because it's just no small thing. We can't do one shelter at a time anymore. And so I can't manage one shelter. It's going to be more and more, until we get to 2025. But then what then? If we reach this huge goal, what do we do, after that? And I think what you're going to start seeing is less brick and mortar shelters as we know them and more community-based animal care.
Wow.
So the community taking responsibility for the animals, the dogs and the cats primarily, that are in their community, the community responding to their neighbors in need who their dog keeps getting out, they need a better fence built. We don't need animal control to come out and, confiscate that dog and hold it in a shelter, brick and mortar for however many days. Let's get your neighbor to help you build a fence.
Love it.
That kind of community model, which is, I don't think we ever would have considered that as feasible until the pandemic.
There are a handful of silver linings that people could find in whatever environment we're in. I think you look at, global pollution dropping quite a bit, and those things that would not have happened had it not been for this. And so it's not meant to diminish, the severity of the virus or anything like that. But if we can see those silver linings and focus on those and spread the word, and you're not going to read about a lot of this progress on the news, right? I mean, you're not. It's not as exciting as death tolls in politics, and so the real important thing is to share the word with our community. I love that you're doing this. I mean, this is what this is all about. I certainly want to make sure that I link, best friends and ways that people in the community can really get involved. Beyond just, rescues, but really in taking care of their shelters and doing this the right way.
Mm-hmm.
I see that there are great donation opportunities with the Best Friends page right up front.
Yeah.
And
we are a nonprofit, so everything we do is donation based. We happen to be very, very fortunate to be a large nonprofit. And so I think we financially are able to sustain ourselves in a way that some of the smaller ones, we're having more success sustaining ourselves.
Okay.
Through the pandemic, I should say. The smaller ones, if you know of, obviously I would love for everyone to donate to Best Friends because we will use your money in a very profitable way for the animals. But if you know of a local rescue group that needs your help, make sure to not overlook them. The other thing that people can do, and I wish I had a link handy to give you, but I might be able to find it after the fact so you can post it. But on our Best Friends website, we have something called the dashboard, where you can look at a map of the United States and you can zoom in on your community, find out what shelter is closest to you. You can see their stats, and then you can link to their website. And it may be that your shelter is already no kill. Awesome, but that doesn't mean that they don't need you. Maybe they need donations. Maybe they need, blankets, fosters, help with an adoption event. So if you look at that map and you hone in on your community, you will find where your shelter is and where they need you the most. And it may be that they haven't reached no kill yet. And in that case, ask them what they need. Do they need fosters or do they need volunteers? Do they need dog walkers? What do they need?
I love it. I'm on your site here. I'm sharing this with you. So I can see that there are locations for the Best Friends location, but for your dashboard, if they want to see ways, what I'll do, I'll make sure at least that I point people here. And then if you know where on the site, I'm going to have to find it because it's a large website. Yeah, no, that's great though. But I see a search box. So, so I think I'll certainly link bestfriends.org, and then we'll also make sure that I'll put people in touch with you if you're okay with it. And your social medias. I think as a supervisor, I know you've got the best direction to give people. Man, we covered all sorts of positivity. I am really encouraged by the fact that you were able to navigate a path where you hit those bucket list items with your music. You saw the boundaries that you had to put together, and you really did a great job in your recovery to not only take care of yourself, but you're taking care of a large population outside. And I'm just really grateful to be back in touch with you and see the work you're doing. I'm really proud of you, Jenn Stone. Thank you so much. That means a lot coming from you. I'm so glad I got to meet you on that cruise, and under the circumstances that we met, truly you were a lifeline in that moment. And it's so wonderful to see and keep in touch with, even though I'm not really in the music world as much, I play at a church full time, which is awesome. But in terms of gigging, I'm not in that world anymore. And so it's really nice to see my friends from that world succeeding and doing well and keeping in touch with them, because that's me too. Yeah, we're just kind of shifting gears to different environments right now, like this. This is my temporary until we get back
Yeah,
out
I
there.
love it. Your hair looks amazing too.
Thank you. That's new as of a couple of hours ago, but
I love it.
my pandemic hair.
Yep.
Jenn Stone, thank you so much for being here. I'll make sure that people get in touch with best friends and also on your socials. And again, thanks to 5 Star Guitars for being supportive, Onyx Microphones for being here. Another Nashville group. Actually, I've got Cloverdale coming in on Monday.
Awesome.
Great husband and wife duo that I know from the Portland area. They were one of the success stories that moved to Nashville and really did well. So they too are involved in a lot of charity events and community-based stuff. So Monday is going to be a cool success story for Chad and Rachel Hamer from Cloverdale. So tune in next week if you subscribe to this YouTube channel now at youtube.com/allaccesslive with Kevin Rankin. I'm going to be doing a drawing for a couple of $50 Amazon gift cards for folks once we get up to the 500 subscriber mark. And next week, my gosh, not only do we have Cloverdale, I've got Ruth McCartney and Angie McCartney, Paul McCartney's stepsister. And I have all sorts of great guests next week. So it's going to be fun. We'll have information about this Audix partnership. And in the meantime, have a beautiful weekend. Get out there and be nice to everybody and help your local shelter. Jenn, thank you so much. Have a great weekend. It's really nice to get in touch with you.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity and letting me talk about music and cats, which is really all I ever want to talk about.
I love it.
I appreciate it so much. And I'll chat with you soon.
You got it. Take care, folks. Have a great day, everybody.